Hi everyone, Tracy DW here. Modern debates about the term Anglo Saxon are closely connected to Britain's long history of migration, conquest and empire. Many scholars now question whether the term accurately reflects the complexity of early medieval Britain, or whether it carries later political and racial meanings that distort the past. Because Britain later became a global imperial power, Anglo-Saxon was often used to present English institutions as naturally superior, justify imperial expansion, and promote ideas of civilizing missions. In the United States, the term fed into the idea of the WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant elite, and, as a result, some scholars argue the term carries the legacy of colonialism, white supremacy, and exclusionary nationalism. Modern archaeology, genetics, and history also complicate the old picture. Researchers now emphasise that early medieval Britain was ethnically mixed, shaped by migration and interaction, and connected to Europe and beyond. Rather than a pure Anglo-Saxon people, historians increasingly see blending between Britons, Anglo-Saxons, Vikings and Normans, and fluid identities rather than fixed ethnic groups. This challenges older nationalists' narratives of a single English racial origin. Some historians now prefer alternatives such as Early English, Early Medieval England, or Post-Roman Britain, and their reasons for this include the term's racial misuse in modern politics, its implication of a single unified ethnic group, and the desire to stress diversity and cultural mixing. However, not all scholars want to abandon the term, and some argue that it is still useful for describing a specific historical period. Medieval writers themselves used related identities, Angles and Saxons, and abandoning it could oversimplify history in a different way. So the debate is not simply about the correct versus incorrect, but about how language shapes historical understanding. But what is the legacy of the Anglo-Saxon era? First of all, it's worth noting that the Norman conquest transformed the elite language of government and aristocracy, and England's later history is a blend of Anglo-Saxon, Viking and Norman influences, so the Anglo-Saxon legacy is foundational, but not the whole story. The legacy of the Anglo-Saxon era, circa 5th century to the Norman conquest, is deep and long-lasting. It shaped England's language, political system, culture and identity in ways that still matter today. The most important legacy is language, as modern English is rooted in Old English spoken by the Anglo-Saxons. Everyday words like house, bread, king, mother come from this period, as well as place names like Birmingham, Nottingham, Southampton reflect Anglo-Saxon origins in ham and tun. Even after 1066, when Norman French influenced English, the Anglo-Saxon base remained dominant. The Anglo-Saxons also laid the groundwork for a unified England. Early kingdoms, like Wessex and Mercia, evolved into a single kingdom, and kings such as Aethelstan helped create the first unified English state with systems of administration, such as shires and local courts, and these began in this period. This is the origin of England as a political identity. Many elements of English law trace back to Anglo-Saxon practices. Written law codes under Alfred the Great, ideas of compensation instead of revenge, and the local assemblies. These influenced later legal traditions, including aspects of common law. The spread of Christianity also reshaped society. Initiated by Gregorian mission, monasteries became centres of literacy, learning, and art, and England became part of a wider European Christian world. All these helped unify different kingdoms culturally. The Anglo Saxon period produced some of England's earliest literature, which shaped English literary works such as Beowulf, one of the most important early European literary works, and historical writings like the Anglo Saxon Chronicle and scholars such as Bede. There were social and cultural structures that became key features of society that left a legacy, such as the importance of kingship and loyalty, lord-thane relationships, rural village-based life and farming systems and social hierarchy, kings, nobles, freemen, slaves. Some of these structures influenced later medieval society. The idea of national identity, the idea of being English, begins here with the term Englaland, land of the Angles, and emerges a shared language, religion and kingship which foster identity, and this identity survived even after Norman rule. However, the British Isles went from colonised to coloniser, as it experienced multiple waves of external domination from the Roman conquest of Britain to the Norman conquest. It later became the centre of the British Empire. Comparing these phases reveals both continuities and important differences in how power operated. First, there was external control versus outward expansion. As a recipient of colonialism, Britain was invaded and ruled by outsiders, such as the Romans and Normans, who imposed new elites, laws and cultures. But as an empire, Britain became the expanding power, projecting control overseas into the Americas, Africa and Asia. Britain shifted from being peripheral and controlled to being a core imperial power, controlling others. In terms of settlement patterns, earlier colonisation saw Anglo-Saxons and Vikings settled in Britain, often replacing or assimilating local populations. But as the British Empire, in places like North America and Australia, Britain imported settler colonialism, where British populations migrated and displaced indigenous peoples. So, this model of settlement and cultural replacement produced a kind of continuity in that it was repeated abroad. Elite domination and land control through Norman England came after 1066. Land was redistributed to a foreign Norman elite under William the Conqueror, and this was mirrored throughout the British Empire, as British authorities often ruled through small elite groups, controlling land and resources in colonies like India and Ireland. Continuity was seen here again, as control through land ownership and elite dominance remained central. And there was also a cultural and linguistic impact, as in Britain, as colonised. Latin from the Romans and French from the Normans influenced language and administration. Christianity spread through missions like the Gregorian mission, and so in the empire. Britain exported the English language, legal systems and education, and Christianity and other cultural norms. Here, the continuity ends as Britain moved from absorbing foreign influences to imposing its own influences globally. Scale and ideology in early colonisation of Britain was regional and fragmented and not driven by formal racial ideologies, whereas in the British Empire, colonialism was global in scale and justified by ideas of racial superiority and civilising missions. So unlike what happened upon British Isle soil, empire was more systematic, global and ideologically driven. And then you have the internal versus external colonialism, as within the British Isles, England later acted as a colonising force over Ireland and Wales, and then these methods were extended overseas. There was certainly continuity here, as practices developed at home were often exported abroad. Britain's experience as a colonised land helped shape patterns later seen in its empire, especially settlement, elite control and cultural transformation. However, the British Empire differed in its global scale, economic integration and racial ideology, marking a shift from regional conquest to a highly organised imperial system. This was the difference in that one was regional, fragmented, and happened over long periods of time, while the other was systematic, expansive, continuative, and racially driven in its approach. If you like this podcast, then stay on this listening platform, click the subscribe button and check out my other episodes related to this one, such as the first part episode, Beyond the Conquerors, the Colonialism of the British Isles, the previous episode to this one, the Anglo Saxon myth, and Colonialism, Just a Thing of the Past, parts 1 and 2 from the second season. And don't forget what I call the heart and soul of the Stories to be Told movement, my stories or poetic narratives, Caribbean Wind, Caribbean Rush, Knights at the Round Table, the Berlin Conference 1884 and Gone with the Wind, Macmillan's Speech for Change. These are all available on the website in paperback, on Amazon in Kindle format and in ebook format at Apple Books and all other digital platforms. And also the publication of the latest 4 titles. Now, if you want to find out more, just visit storiestobetold.com and check out the learning platforms for The Journey's End, Giving Back Hong Kong, Bite from the Big Apple, A Story for New York, Hope for Zimbabwe, Arise the Phoenix, and A Story for South Africa. If you'd like to sign up to my email list, just visit the website where you can opt in and receive your free samples of my first 4 titles. And finally, remember that you can also send me an audio message on the SpeakPipe link, which is also in the show notes, so don't be a stranger. Feel free to like, follow and share us on social media when you visit the website. Just click onto whichever social media link you would like to follow us on. And as always, it's a pleasure and a privilege to share my learning journey with you in this podcast series, and I encourage you to either begin or continue your own. History is a matter of fact or perspective. I'm Tracy DW, and this is a Stories to be Told podcast. Stay safe, stay well, stay blessed. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next